David Wright adjusted the collar of his uniform as he stepped into the humming lecture hall of the Interstellar Space Academy. The room was bustling with the low chatter of students, a kaleidoscope of alien forms from dozens of planets, each unique in color and shape. "Quiet down, everyone," David announced, his voice calm yet commanding. The room fell into an expectant silence. He made his way to the holographic projector at the front of the class, the eyes of the future military leaders of the galaxy fixed on him. "Today we're going to explore a series of Earth's historical battles," David began, tapping on his console to bring up images of ancient Earth artifacts, swords, shields, and faded battle standards. A murmur of curiosity rustled through the classroom. A tall, slender student with luminous skin raised a hand. "Sir, why study ancient history when we have advanced technology?" she asked, her voice tinged with a mix of skepticism and genuine curiosity. David smiled, understanding the challenge behind the question. "Because, Shilanthia, history teaches us not just about tactics, but about understanding an opponent's mind and heart. Battles aren't won by technology alone, they're won by strategies, by knowing when to strike, retreat, or defend." Another student, a burly figure with skin the color of rusted iron, chimed in. "But Earth's technology was primitive. What could we possibly learn from them?" "Great question, Rogar," David replied. "Let's look at the Battle of Midway during Earth's Second World War. It was pivotal, not because of sheer power, but because of intelligence and the element of surprise." He detailed the battle's strategy, the feints, and the risky gambles that turned the tide. The room was wrapped with attention, the initial skepticism slowly morphing into intrigued whispers. As David spoke, holographic images played out the scenes of aircraft soaring and ships maneuvering in oceanic expanses. "Notice here," he pointed, "how Admiral Nimitz positioned his limited forces. He outsmarted a superior force through wit." A student with skin like molten silver and eyes as black as void raised her hand. "Wouldn't a direct assault have been simpler?" "It might seem that way, Zara," David explained, "but a direct assault against a stronger enemy is often a path to defeat. Nimitz understood his disadvantages and turned them into advantages. It's about playing the long game, thinking ahead." As the lecture drew to a close, David posed a question to the class. "How can these lessons apply to our current interstellar conflicts?" The students broke into small groups, animatedly discussing the principles they'd just learned. David walked among them, listening, guiding, and occasionally challenging their assertions. "Remember," he concluded as the class ended, "the principles of warfare are universal, transcending time and species. It's not just about the past, it's about how we apply these lessons to the future." As the students filed out, their expressions were thoughtful, their earlier reservations replaced with a burgeoning respect for the unexpected depth of human history. David packed up his notes, satisfied with the first sparks of understanding he'd ignited today. His journey at the academy was just beginning, but it promised to be as enriching for him as it was for his students. The next morning, David Wright strode into the lecture hall with a new set of plans tucked under his arm. Today's lesson promised to delve deeper, pushing the students to not only learn, but to apply Earth's historical tactics to hypothetical scenarios. The room buzzed with anticipation as David set up for his lecture. "Yesterday, we discussed the importance of strategy over brute force," David began, scanning the room filled with eager faces. "Today, we'll explore how adaptability can turn the tide in battle. We'll be examining the guerrilla tactics of the Vietnam War." A hand shot up from the back, a young student from Thrix, known for their quick reflexes and sharp minds. "Professor Wright, how relevant are guerrilla tactics in space warfare?" "Excellent question, Tavar," David acknowledged. "While the environment differs, the principles remain the same. Hit-and-run tactics, unpredictability, and using terrain to your advantage. Imagine asteroids and nebulae instead of jungles and tunnels." David activated the holographic display, illustrating his points with vivid simulations of small strike forces ambushing larger fleets in asteroid belts, using the debris for cover. "Let's break it into a simulation," David suggested, turning the lesson into a practical exercise. "You'll be split into groups. One will act as the guerrilla force and the other as the regular military power. Your goal is to either carry out a successful ambush or to counter it effectively." The students quickly formed their groups, buzzing with strategy and speculation. David walked around, observing their plans and offering insights when needed. As the simulations played out, a group led by a student named Kaylee, known for her strategic thinking, managed a clever feint that led to a simulated decimation of a much larger force. The room erupted in applause and excited chatter. See the power of adaptation in understanding your environment? David highlighted as the simulation concluded. A student with a translucent complexion and bioluminescent spots, Gane, raised a hand. How do we balance these tactics with the moral implications they bring? David nodded, pleased with the depth of the question. Warfare always carries moral weight. Part of being a good leader is knowing how to minimize harm while achieving objectives. It's not just about winning, it's about how you win. As the class wrapped up, David left them with a thought-provoking assignment. For next time, think about an historical Earth battle or campaign. Consider how those tactics could be adapted to an interstellar environment. Be ready to discuss and defend your strategies. The students left the room abuzz with ideas, their minds racing with possibilities. David collected his notes, satisfied with the day's progress. The seeds of understanding and application were beginning to sprout, promising a crop of thoughtful and adaptable future leaders. David Wright adjusted the settings on the holographic projector as the students settled into their seats for another day at the Interstellar Space Academy. Today's focus was different, aimed at understanding the psychological aspects of warfare. The murmurs quieted as David opened his lecture with a question. Can anyone tell me what psychological warfare entails? David scanned the classroom, noting the curious glances exchanged among the students. A hand from the middle row shot up. It was Lyral, a student from a species known for their empathic abilities. It involves using tactics that manipulate an enemy's state of mind, causing confusion or demoralizing them, correct? Exactly, Lyral, David affirmed, activating the display to show various historical Earth campaigns that utilize psychological strategies. Today, we'll analyze the psychological operations during the Cold War, specifically how misinformation and propaganda were used to influence not just military decisions, but the general public's morale. David guided the class through several case studies, including broadcasts, leaflets, and other media used during the era. He showed them how these seemingly simple tools could sway the opinions and morale of entire populations, altering the course of conflicts without a single shot being fired. Now, let's apply this to a hypothetical scenario, David proposed, turning the discussion more interactive. Imagine you're in a prolonged standoff with an alien race. How could psychological tactics be implemented without direct confrontation? The students divided into groups to brainstorm. Discussions buzzed around the room as they contemplated scenarios involving space blockades, propaganda transmitted via interstellar communications, and even the strategic spread of rumors about technological advancements. As they presented their ideas, David critiqued each group's strategy, focusing on ethical considerations. It's important to remember, he interjected during a particularly heated group presentation, that the goal of psychological warfare should not be to destroy an opponent psychologically, but to prevent further conflict. It's a fine line between strategy and cruelty. The lecture drew to a close with a spirited debate on the moral implications of psychological warfare. A student named Vero posed a challenging question. If the outcome saves lives, is it justified to manipulate and deceive? David nodded thoughtfully. That's a question without an easy answer, Vero. Each situation might require a different moral calculus. What's vital is that we weigh the consequences of our actions, not just on the battlefield but beyond it. As the students filed out, their discussions continued, echoing down the corridor. David packed up his materials, satisfied with the depth of engagement today's lesson had provoked. The complexity of warfare, beyond mere tactics and strategies, was beginning to take shape in their minds, preparing them for the nuanced realities of interstellar leadership. The cool air of the lecture hall buzzed with anticipation as David Wright prepared to delve into another dimension of military strategy. Today, the focus would be on tactical innovations and how necessity often drives the evolution of warfare strategies. David nodded to the class, signaling the start of the lecture. Good morning, everyone. Today we explore how innovation shapes the outcome of conflicts, David began, bringing up images of various military technologies on the projector, from ancient catapults to modern drones. Historically, those who adapt and innovate have often held the upper hand. A student from the back, a keen-eyed individual named Sorn, raised his hand. Professor Wright, could you give us an example of an innovation that significantly changed the course of a battle? Certainly, Sorn, David replied. He switched the display to show the development of the longbow during medieval Earth conflicts. This seemingly simple weapon allowed English forces to defeat heavily armored knights at considerable distances. The longbow was a game-changer in the Battle of Agincourt. As the students absorbed the information, David transitioned to more recent history. Let's fast forward to World War II, the introduction of radar technology. This innovation allowed for the early detection of enemy aircraft and shifted air warfare dramatically. He paused, letting the implications sink in before continuing. Now, imagine you're developing a defense system against hyperspeed missiles in our current interstellar context. How would historical innovation inspire your design? The class divided into smaller groups, each tasked with designing a conceptual defense system based on historical innovations. David circulated among the groups, challenging their assumptions and pushing for deeper strategic thinking. As each group presented their ideas, a vibrant discussion unfolded. One group suggested a system that could create gravitational waves to deflect incoming projectiles, drawing parallels to how radar disrupted air assault tactics. Very creative, David commended. You're learning to think outside the conventional parameters. Remember, innovation isn't just about technology, it's about applying what we know in new ways to meet the challenges we face. A student named Alara, with a keen interest in strategy, asked, "How do we anticipate the needs for innovation? How can we be proactive rather than reactive?" David nodded appreciatively. "Alara, that's where strategic foresight comes into play. We study history not just to replicate past tactics, but to anticipate future needs and potential innovations. It's about looking forward, predicting potential conflicts, and preparing to meet them with innovative solutions." The lecture wrapped up with David assigning a reflective task. For your next assignment, choose a historical battle. Analyze the key innovations used and propose how those strategies could be adapted for use in interstellar warfare. As the students left, buzzing with ideas, David felt a sense of accomplishment. The future leaders were not just learning about history, they were learning to shape the future. This synthesis of past and future, of history and innovation, was essential in grooming the next generation of military strategists. David Wright arrived early in the lecture hall, preparing his notes for a session that would cover the complexities of coalition warfare. The topic was crucial for understanding how alliances could either strengthen or complicate military strategies. As the students began to filter in, David sensed a heightened level of enthusiasm. Today's discussion promised to be lively. "Good morning," David greeted as the last of the students settled into their seats. "Today we delve into the dynamics of coalition warfare. This is about understanding how alliances impact strategy and execution on the battlefield." David projected images of various historical coalitions onto the screen, starting with the Allied powers during World War II. Let's discuss the Allies' strategy against the Axis powers. Coordination among countries with different military capabilities and political agendas was crucial. Yet it was their ability to unify their strategies that ultimately led to their success. A student with tentacle-like appendages named Threx raised a question. How did they manage to coordinate such diverse forces effectively? "That's a great question, Threx," David replied, highlighting communications from the era. They established joint command structures and created inter-allied councils to manage strategic decisions. Effective communication and shared objectives were key. David moved the discussion forward to more recent times, discussing NATO operations and their coordinated efforts in various global hotspots. Here we see a modern example of coalition forces working in concert to achieve a common goal. However, such coalitions can also face challenges such as differing political goals, operational styles, and even command structures. He then proposed a scenario to the class. Imagine you are in a coalition with two alien races. One values stealth and surprise, while the other prioritizes brute force. How do you design a battle plan that incorporates both philosophies effectively? The students broke into groups, each tasked with crafting a strategy that integrated the differing tactical approaches. David walked among the groups, listening to heated debates and innovative solutions being formulated. As the session neared its end, each group presented their coalition battle plans. David critiqued each, emphasizing the importance of compromise and the strategic allocation of roles based on each ally's strengths. Remember, coalition warfare is as much about diplomacy and politics as it is about military might, David concluded. Mastering this balance is crucial for any leader in a multi-species interstellar alliance. The lecture ended with David assigning a reading on the diplomatic negotiations that preceded historical military coalitions. Understand the negotiations behind the scenes, he advised. These are as critical as the battles that follow. As the students exited, discussing the day's insights, David packed up his materials, satisfied with the depth of understanding achieved. Today's lesson had bridged past and present, theory and application, preparing these future commanders for the intricate dance of coalition warfare. The atmosphere in the lecture hall was charged with anticipation as David Wright prepared to detail one of the most complex military operations in human history, the siege of Zeta Prime. The students shuffled their notes and readied themselves for a lesson that promised a blend of strategic depth and raw human valor. Today, we'll be examining the siege of Zeta Prime, David announced, activating the holographic projector to display a detailed map of the Zeta star system. This siege was not just a battle. It was a prolonged struggle that tested the limits of human endurance and strategic ingenuity. A student from the front, a quick-witted being from Cygnus named Rill, raised her hand. "Professor Wright, was this a typical siege involving encirclement and isolation?" "An excellent question, Rill," David replied, bringing up tactical overlays. "In many ways, yes, but with a twist. The defenders utilized the unique topology of Zeta Prime's main planet, which included extensive underground networks, to wage a guerrilla campaign against a technologically superior enemy." David detailed the initial stages of the siege, where the invaders had used massive bombardment tactics, assuming they could quickly overwhelm the defenders. However, the humans adapted quickly, turning the underground cities into fortified bases, striking out and then vanishing before the enemy could regroup. The class was riveted as David described the human tactics of hit and run, the sabotage of supply lines, and psychological operations that sapped the invaders' morale. "Let's shift gears," David proposed. "How would you, as commanders, break such a siege if you were the attackers, knowing the defenders are entrenched and using guerrilla tactics?" The students divided into groups, each tasked with developing a strategy to break the siege. Discussions erupted around the room, with students debating various approaches, from technological solutions like seismic detectors to root out hidden bases, to siege-breaking tactics involving negotiations and creating dissent within the besieged population. David moved from group to group, offering insights and challenging their strategies with real-world complications. "Consider the ethical implications of your tactics," he urged one group. "And remember, the goal of warfare is not just victory, but securing a lasting peace." As the groups presented their strategies, David critiqued and commended their efforts. "You've tackled the operational aspects brilliantly," he praised, "but always remember the human element. In a siege, morale is as critical as ammunition." The lecture concluded with a discussion on the outcomes of the siege of Zeta Prime, focusing on the peace negotiations that followed. The siege ended not just because of military might, but because both sides came to a realization that a continued conflict would leave them both weakened, David explained. He assigned the students a paper analyzing the siege, focusing on the interplay between military tactics and political strategy. Think about the broader implications of such conflicts. How do they end, and what ensures peace is sustainable? As the students filed out, deep in thought and discussion, David felt a sense of accomplishment. Today's lesson had gone beyond tactics, touching on the essence of strategic thinking and leadership in war. David Wright entered the lecture hall with a sense of purpose, his gaze sweeping over the students assembled for today's session on space warfare, a topic at the heart of interstellar military strategy. The young cadets, representing diverse civilizations and military philosophies, readied themselves for insights into one of the most challenging aspects of modern combat. "Welcome," David began, his voice resonating with authority. "Today we explore the mastery of space combat, focusing on maneuverability, tactics, and the use of environmental factors like asteroid fields and nebulae." He activated the holographic projector, which displayed a complex three-dimensional battlefield strewn with obstacles and varying gravitational forces. Space combat isn't just about firepower, it's about using space itself as a weapon. A student named Jor-El, known for his tactical acumen, raised a hand. "Professor Wright, could you elaborate on how environmental factors can be used strategically?" "Certainly, Jor-El," David responded, zooming in on a simulated asteroid field on the display. "Consider this asteroid field. It can serve as cover, but also as a trap if navigated poorly. Skilled commanders use such fields to their advantage, laying ambushes or evading superior forces." David then guided the class through several historical battles where commanders had successfully utilized the topography of space to outmaneuver their enemies. He outlined the principles of kinetic bombardment, the strategic deployment of mines, and the stealth tactics enabled by nebulae. Let's put theory into practice, David suggested, transitioning the class into a simulation exercise. You'll be divided into 2 fleets. One will navigate the asteroid field to execute an ambush, while the other must detect and counter this maneuver without sustaining heavy casualties. The students eagerly formed their teams, taking positions at the simulation consoles. David walked among them, observing their decision-making processes and providing feedback where necessary. As the exercise unfolded, one team used a decoy squadron to lure their opponents into a dense part of the asteroid field, then executed a flanking maneuver that simulated a devastating blow to their adversaries. The classroom erupted in applause and animated discussion about the tactics used. Excellent work, David praised, then posed a critical question. But what if your technology fails in such an environment? How do you adapt without advanced sensors? This question spurred a secondary discussion about redundancy in space combat systems and the importance of training crews to rely not just on technology, but on their instincts and fundamental navigational skills. As the lecture wrapped up, David left the students with a reflective question for their next assignment. Consider the ethical implications of space warfare. What are the consequences of actions like kinetic bombardment on potentially habitable worlds? The students departed, buzzing with ideas and newfound respect for the complexities of space warfare. David collected his notes, satisfied that he had ignited a passion for strategic thought and ethical considerations in the next generation of space commanders. The semester was drawing to a close, and David Wright stood before his class for one last lecture. The room was filled with a reflective silence as the students awaited insights that would encapsulate their months of rigorous study and spirited debates. David, too, felt a mix of anticipation and a hint of melancholy as he prepared to impart his final thoughts. Today, we won't be delving into historical battles or tactical theories, David began, his tone more subdued than usual. Instead, we'll talk about the essence of what it means to be a leader in times of peace and conflict. Leadership is not just about directing others in battle. It's about inspiring them to achieve greater things and leaving a legacy that outlasts your command. He projected images of renowned leaders from various civilizations, human and alien alike, each of whom had left a profound impact on their people and their times. Each of these leaders understood that their actions would echo through history. They knew the weight of their decisions, not just on their immediate surroundings, but on the course of future events. A student named Cale, known for his critical thinking and leadership potential, raised his hand. "Professor Wright, how do we prepare ourselves to handle that kind of responsibility?" David nodded, acknowledging the depth of the question. "By learning from the past, Cale. By understanding the successes and failures of those who came before us, and by cultivating qualities like integrity, humility, and the courage to make difficult decisions." The class listened intently as David emphasized the importance of ethical leadership. A true leader's strength isn't measured by their victories alone, but by their ability to uphold their values even in the face of adversity. It's about making tough choices that may not always be popular, but are necessary for the greater good. David encouraged the students to engage in a roundtable discussion, sharing their thoughts on what they believed constituted a good leader. The conversation was rich with diverse perspectives, reflecting the varied backgrounds and cultures of the students. "As you move forward," David said as the discussion wound down, "remember that leadership is also about continuous learning and adaptation. The universe is vast, and its challenges are ever-changing. Staying open to new ideas and being willing to adjust your strategies are key to enduring success." The lecture ended with heartfelt applause, and the students approached David to express their gratitude for the lessons learned. They spoke of their plans, their dreams, and the impact they hoped to make in the universe. David felt a profound sense of accomplishment and optimism for the future these young leaders would shape. As the students left the room for the last time, they carried with them not just the knowledge of military strategies, but the principles of leadership that would guide them in whatever challenges they would face next. Reflecting on his own journey, David realized that his greatest legacy was not in the battles he had won, but in the minds he had inspired. The true victory lay in the knowledge that his teachings would ripple through space and time, influencing generations to come.